Previously on OSRL, we built a complete heating, ventilation, and air conditioning system for our off-grid home called Earth Tubes, and it functions using absolutely no electricity. Today, we'll show you how we built and installed the system step by step. Plus, we'll go over exactly how the system works, pros and cons, and we'll answer your questions about Earth Tubes.
How's it going, everyone? Well, we're excited. We just got done installing our own Earth Tube system, a method of being able to cool our home using zero electricity. Now, I know with these previous videos we've made, there's still a lot of questions out there. Heck, people are even wondering how this even works. So that's what this video is about. We're going to take the whole building process, we're going to put it into one video. We're going to explain how this whole thing works and answer your questions.
So let's talk about what is an Earth Tube HVAC system. Basically, it is heating, ventilation, and air conditioning where you have tubes running through the ground, they're buried, and air passes through them and goes into your home. As it goes through these tubes, the air is either heated or cooled, and it's also dried.
All right, so first off, how does this whole thing work?
It's really cool because you're using, instead of electricity, you're using natural forces. You're working with the forces of nature, and that makes it really efficient. So basically, we know that hot air rises, and so the hot air inside the house is going to rise to the highest point, and there is where you're going to have some kind of opening, either like a vent, or you might have a solar chimney, or you could even have a window that's cracked open slightly, just something to let the hot air out of. And once that hot air leaves the house, it's going to create a negative pressure. So that's how it draws air in from those earth tubes, and how you can do it without using electricity. Now, as far as how does it cool the air or heat it in the winter and dry it as well, that's all natural as well.
So this is the pipe inlet. As you can see, we got a 90-degree over this pipe. We got it screened. We got it painted to keep the UV light off of the end of the tube. But this is where the air will get sucked up into.
Yeah, and this is the end furthest from the house. So when the air enters this side of the tube, it's going to go down into the ground and pass all the way through 100 feet of pipe.
100 feet long, 6 feet deep.
Now, as it passes through that pipe, it's going to get cooled because the ground at that depth is a stable temperature year-round. So generally, like below the frost line, there's stable temperatures. In the US, like in the northern latitudes, you're going to have temperatures around 45 to 50 degrees. And in the south, where we're at, it's going to be more like 50 to 70 degrees. So that means that air in the summer, the hot air that goes in there, is going to get cooled. And in the winter, there's colder air going in there, and it's going to get warmed. In addition, in the summer, when the air is hot and it gets cooled off, what happens is any moisture in the air is going to condense and turn to liquid, and that condensation process is going to dry the air out so you don't have humid air going into your house, and it's also going to cool the air off further.
And of course, keep in mind we have holes at the bottom of these pipes to let all that condensation drain out of the bottom of the pipe. Okay, so what are the pros and cons of a system like this?
Well, like we mentioned, it doesn't require any electricity.
Works 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You don't need to think about turning it on. You don't need to think about turning it off. If you are on solar like we are, if you're not tied to the grid, you don't have to worry about it depleting your batteries. It just constantly works to regulate that air.
And if everything's installed properly and done right, then you shouldn't have to worry about maintenance or repairs on it. And another nice thing about it is there's no moving parts, which means there's less chances of anything malfunctioning.
The cost of this is very similar to a good quality mini split. But of course, then you got to think, how many mini splits do you need in your house to cool off the various rooms? How long do those mini splits last before you need to get a new one or get it repaired or anything like that? I mean, you know, I know people that have had mini splits and they've had to have people come out there and service it and everything like that. There's a lot of extra costs that go into that. With this, it's set it and forget it.
That's always nice. And it lasts a long time. You know, once these tubes are buried, it should last for 100 years or more.
Oh, okay, yeah. That's pretty good.
And actually, the total cost is less than like the average install for an HVAC system. For a residential HVAC, I think the average is over $5,000. And how much did we pay for this?
$2,100. Now that includes the materials, like all the pipes, all the angles, and even the cost of having an excavator come out to dig those trenches. So that's total cost.
Yeah. Now that cost might vary. I mean, prices change and like excavation costs are going to vary.
Even now, if we were to install this system now versus when we bought the materials, prices have already gone up.
True. Well, let's talk about some of the possible drawbacks of this kind of system.
You telling me there are drawbacks?
There's always drawbacks. So this is usually a DIY type project, which means that you're going to be doing most of the work yourself, and it might take a little bit longer for you to do that. So, you know, if you're not into that sort of a thing, then maybe this is a drawback for you. We like doing DIY things.
That's what we do.
But also, this type of system might not actually be suitable for all areas, or it might not be cost effective. So like if you live in a place where you have a very high water table, you know, if you live in a swamp or something, you dig down a little bit and the hole fills up with water, this is going to be a lot more difficult. You know, I suppose you could like make berms and put the tubes in the berms, but I don't know quite how efficient it would be doing that. Another thing is you want to make sure these pipes are below the frost line. So if you live in a really cold climate where you have a really deep frost line, it's going to be harder to dig that deep, and it might, you know, cost a lot or just be really difficult. For us here, you know, the frost line is barely anything. We could have gone like more shallow with it, but I think like going the depth we did, we know that it's going to be a lot more stable temperatures at that depth.
And we'll probably see a lot more return for the cost.
Yeah. Another thing to think about is the house that you're putting the system into. Is it an existing building that's old and there's a lot of leaks in it? It's not very energy efficient, you know, or even a lot of newer homes, like your conventional standard homes, are not super energy efficient. That's going to mean that this system is not going to be as efficient. So even in a less efficient house, you could do a system like this, and it might just mean that you need to put in more tubes to make up for the lack of efficiency, or you might need another supplemental source of heating or cooling. Another issue is space. You know, if you don't have a bunch of land or a large yard, then you might not be able to do a system like this. You need at least 100 feet of distance to put these pipes in the ground.
I mean, could you imagine this? We couldn't have even done this when we were living in the city.
No. And then another consideration, it might not be a huge thing, but, you know, depending on where you are, the type of soil that you have. clay heavy soil is actually the best because it's the best conductor of heat. You can transfer that heat better. Sand is probably the worst. And moisture level also is going to affect the efficiency. Let's talk about the materials and tools and equipment that we use to do this project. First of all, obviously you need material for the tubes, which is mostly PVC pipe. And what kind of pipe do we use for that?
4-inch PVC, Schedule 20, the thin wall kind of drainage pipe.
And we needed 100 feet of that for each tube, plus more for the ends. So you need a pipe that's going to go, down into the ground. And the length of that is going to depend on different things like how deep the trenches are and how far you need to go to get the pipe into the house.
So in our instance, since we went 6 feet deep, for the most part, we just needed another 10-foot section to get it into the house or out of the ground. But in just a couple of cases, we did need to add a little extra pipe.
And then we needed some connector pieces. Now to connect each of the 10-foot lengths, we actually didn't need connectors because we got pipes that had belled ends on them.
That, very nice, saved quite a bit of money.
Yeah, but we did need 45-degree angle connectors for each end of the tube. And then on the far end of the tube, we had 90-degree elbows. Now each tube also needs holes in the bottom for drainage. So we just made our own holes in there. And so we need a drill and a drill bit. And what did you use for that? It was 1/2-inch bit?
1/2 inch.
And then, of course, like a tape measure is handy for marking that out.
And a marker for marking things as well.
And then you'll probably have to cut the PVC pipe.
I just used a hacksaw. Sometimes when cutting PVC, I'll use a Sawzall, but that might be a little too rough for the thin wall PVC. But a hacksaw does just fine, nice, clean cuts, and goes through real easy.
And then for attaching the PVC, we use the PVC primer and glue.
If you have the red hot blue glue, you could probably get away with just using that for this application, but I had some of the primer, so I figure why not.
And of course, you have to dig these trenches, so
maybe just have an excavator on hand.
if you have access to some kind of equipment for digging, we still had to use other digging tools as well.
Obviously, if you're going pretty deep, you might need an excavator. Sometimes you can use a ditch witch, and sometimes you can just do it by hand. Even though we had an excavator, I still needed to use a mattock, a shovel, digging bar. That came in handy when kind of doing some of those angles.
Also, gravel. You're going to need some gravel at the bottom of the trenches for drainage.
Plan accordingly because depending on the width, you need at least 2 to 4 inches of gravel down there at the bottom.
And it's got to go along the whole bottom of the trench, pretty much the whole length. And make sure it's good, clean gravel, nothing with a bunch of dirt or debris like mixed in there. That's going to be important just to keep everything clean.
Let's get on to the build. What's the first thing we got to do? It's almost the first thing we always got to do.
It's always good to start with a plan. We took some time and we thought out exactly how we were going to do this. A really important thing to consider before starting this project is how is the air going to flow through the house? And you'll want to have that air going, across the rooms and through the different rooms in a way that is efficient and provides maximum comfort for you. And also make note of where the air is going to be entering the house and where it's exiting. Also, we had to plan the number of tubes that we wanted for the house. So generally speaking, it's recommended you have 1 tube per room. That probably excludes like tiny rooms, things like pantries, even like the bathroom. You probably don't need a tube in there. And if you have a larger room, you might want 2 tubes. Also, if the house is not very energy efficient, or if you live in a humid climate, maybe you want to add more tubes as well. We chose to have 5 tubes. So it was like 1 tube for every room on the north side of our house, plus 2 tubes going into our root cellar. It's also really a good idea to plan your house for maximum efficiency as well. So if it's a new build, there's a lot you can do to plan for that. And you can look into passive solar houses and how you should orient your house to prevent like too much heat in the summer and getting that maximum solar gain in the winter for heating the home. And window placement.
There's a lot that could be said about that.
Yeah, there's plenty. But if you have an existing building and you want to do this kind of system, there are still things that you can do to make it more efficient. If there's a way you can add more insulation to the house, sealing any air leaks, shade your windows if you have windows on the western side or southern side of the house in the summer. And you could even add thermal mass if you have an opportunity, like to add a stone wall or like maybe an earthen floor somewhere. That'll really help as well.
Help regulate those temperatures.
And the other thing you need to plan for is where the tubes are going outside, the part that's going to be buried underground. So remember, you need at least 100 feet of distance, and you'll want to take a look at, if there's any trees or things that are in the way, anything like gas lines or electric lines. So these tubes, they're going to be most efficient if they run in a straight line. So if you can plan them for that, that's going to be best. If that's not possible, you can have some bends in them. Just try to avoid too many, especially like sharp angles. So once you have a good plan in place, then you're ready to get to work. And the first thing we had to do was dig our trenches.
Now, luckily, we were able to hire an excavator really good. This guy was able to dig out one of these 100-foot long trenches in just a couple hours.
And like we said, we went down about 6 feet deep.
All right, so our excavator just got done, left a little while ago, and man, he did a fantastic job. So what are your thoughts on everything?
It's exciting. Like, a lot changed in a day here.
What were you telling me about how deep these trenches are and how much dirt he dug up?
I mean, I knew how deep it was gonna be, but seeing it seems like a lot.
And now we have mountains of dirt again. And she's already been exploring all the dirt piles, haven't you? Haven't you been exploring the dirt piles?
I've heard of some people that have dug the trenches themselves. Maybe they bought or rented a trenching tool.
Oh, Ditch Witch?
Yeah, something like that. Like, you possibly could do that yourself. For us, our soil is very clay heavy. It's very hard to dig, so we went with an excavator.
You might be able to get away with putting these down like 3 feet deep. There have been people that have had success going that far, but like if you can get it 5 to 6 feet down, I mean, that's the golden area right there.
So after everything was dug out, we laid gravel down at the bottom of the trenches.
No special machinery for that. You know, I had a pile of gravel. I had to load up the wheelbarrows and take that in and just get that spread out into each of the trenches. So remember, you need about 2 to 4 inches of gravel down at the bottom of the trench. So keep that in mind with how wide your trench is and where those pipes are going to be. Good morning, y'all. Of course, I was up before the sun was up and finally done with the gravel, at least I think. I got to get down there with a shovel, just kind of maneuver the gravel around a little bit, get it toward the center, make sure everything's deep enough, and then I can move on to the next portion. Very cool. But that's how you got to do it this time of year. Get out there early, get your work done, take it a little easy in the afternoon, then come back out in the evening. You know, working down here, moving the dirt, spreading the gravel, it's actually still pretty cool down here, even though it's incredibly exposed. Feels nice and cool. You hit some spots and it's even like, whoa, you get like a blast of air conditioning. So I definitely have a good feeling about this.
So next, we had to drill the drainage holes in the tubes.
I used a 1/2-inch bit, and during the first tube, I actually made those holes 6 inches apart, and then decided because we're in a drier climate, I was going to spread that out to 1 feet apart. I did that for each of the 10 pipes that are going to be right along the bottom of the trench.
And you want just a single row of holes in the tubes. Make sure it's in a straight line just on one side of the tube.
We use just the writing on the tube as sort of like the line to drill those holes in against, just to keep making sure everything was straight.
Yeah, that was just a really convenient way to keep that in a straight line.
Now when drilling these holes, you got to go kind of slow. If you go too fast, you're likely to crack the pipe. Ask me how I know. Just 8 more to go.
So after we got the drainage holes in there, we laid out the pipes in the trench.
And then we started putting them together, holes up. And that's just to keep everything lined up as we attached everything.
We wanted to make sure that they were all lined up really well and we could see them as we're putting it together. So we got it all glued together, and then we flipped it over so that the holes were on the bottom facing the gravel. Now in one of the trenches we had 3 tubes, and you can put more than 1 tube in per trench if your plans allow for that.
Keep in mind you need approximately about a foot of space in between those pipes in order to maximize the cooling properties.
So we made sure those were spaced out properly. I think we put some rocks in there to make sure they didn't shift or anything. I feel like she's thinking about
She's thinking about it. Stop thinking about it. At least she's thinking about it
and not just
doing it.
She did it. She wants to help too. Oh, no.
She smelled that, now she's leaving. She's like, ugh.
And then we put on the ends, which were at a 45-degree angle.
All right, so if you want to hand me that 45. Okay, thank you. And then the primer and the glue. Primer.
Glue.
Okay, can you do me another favor?
Grab the pliers.
Yeah.
Pliers.
Pliers. I gotta break that seal. seal. We're gonna have to put the last pipe in through here.
Okay, are we gonna do like a dry fit first?
Sure, could do that. Yeah, let's put it through the I always like to bag up the ends in the middle of some of these processes because like I had to do more digging in some of these instances, and that just helps keep the pipes clean in between some of these steps.
Yeah, as much as you can keep the pipes from getting anything inside there, like you want to make sure you can do that. Now at the furthest end, you want those tubes to be sticking up out of the ground at least 2 feet. And I think that is to help prevent any small animals from kind of messing with the end of the tube. Once you get the screening on there, you know, rodents or something might chew on it. So you don't want it too close to the ground. And once you get those 45-degree angles on there and get those final pipes on there, you might need some kind of temporary support for them before you get everything backfilled.
I think for the last trench I ended up using cob, and that actually I think is just a perfect support really. It's very strong, very durable. It held everything in place really well while I backfilled.
I recommend doing that if you can. So cob, which is just a mix of straw and mud, and pack it in real good around the joint especially, because that's going to be the weakest point. And you know, if you can't do that, do make sure that those end pipes are well supported with, you know, the earth packed tightly on the underside of those pipes. Then you have to backfill all the trenches.
Hopefully when you get to the backfilling, maybe your excavator is still around. You know, I was fully prepared to do it by hand. It would have taken me a while, but I would have done what I had to do to get the job done. Luckily, we were able to borrow a tractor from a neighbor, so that really sped up the process.
Finally, at the furthest end of the tubes, you're going to want a 90-degree angle at the very end. And this is important to keep rain out of the tubes and also helps with like debris probably. But also on all the ends, you'll want to put a screen on them.
In order to screen these up, I picked up some large pipe clamps and I cut some screening material. And we are just going to fit these over here, like so. Perfect.
Eventually, we're going to have to make some sort of vent register for the inside of the house where the tubes go into the house. And you can have the tubes coming in through the wall at the bottom of the wall and have a vent that way. We're going to have a floor vent, so we'll be building like a register for that and putting like a vent grate over it.
So throughout this process, there have been a lot of questions. We want to try and get to those questions right now. All right, what do we got first?
People are wondering if radon is a concern with this. You know, it's in the ground, radon comes from the ground.
Radon's been a concern for us for a while because we've built some underground structures, and we've actually been monitoring radon in the underground bedroom now for over a year. We have a device down there that's been measuring it this whole time. We actually have very low radon detected down there. Like I said, we've been measuring that for over a year, and we really haven't seen much in the way of radon out here.
Yeah, but for some people, radon might be a bigger concern. I'd say with this system, it shouldn't be a concern as long as you have proper ventilation. You know, it's not any more of a concern than it is for a normal house build. You want to make sure that if radon does get into the house, that you have proper airflow so that it's not building up in there. And with this system, if you have it planned properly, that means you're going to have proper ventilation, and the air exchange rate will be such that the radon will be ventilated out. People were also asking why we have these tubes going in a straight line and not in a loop, some kind of loop that goes from the house out and back into the house.
Basically taking your sort of semi-cooled air, having it go out into the trench, cool it down, and then bringing it back into the house, which I think can be a fine idea if somebody wants to do that. But it won't be, you'll need some type of electrical system in order to push that air in and out of the house. Plus, then you're only recirculating the air. You don't have the capability of bringing in that fresh air. For us, I think this system made a lot of sense. It doesn't dig into our batteries at all. It's going to constantly be bringing in fresh air and cooling it off.
Yeah, and another thing is you don't want a lot of angles in these pipes because it restricts the airflow. You could have like some kind of circular system where you have flexible tubing that doesn't have these angles. It's just all, round. But it might be hard to find something that's like 4 inches or larger that would be adequate for using for this. And if you do add a fan to a system to force the air to move in a certain way, you risk losing efficiency actually.
It is interesting, and I get people's kind of thinking on that. Put a fan on there, it'll push air through there faster. You'll see a lot more cool air get in there, but it's actually not what you want. You want the air to move more naturally, a little slower, give it time to exchange that heat and allow that condensation to happen.
I think people also had questions about the holes in the bottom of the tubes.
I think there's still some confusion about that. That holes are not at the top, they're at the bottom. Yeah. And it just allows for any water to drain out of it.
Yeah, so make sure they're at the bottom and not like on the sides or the top, so other, moisture or other things could get in from other places. And it should drain properly then. Now, why do we use specifically a thin-walled PVC for this?
Yeah, I mean, you could get, I believe, Schedule 40, which is thicker, but you really want the thin-wall drainage PVC to allow that heat transfer. Anything thicker than that, you're going to lose efficiency.
And I think there were concerns about, well, if you do use something that's thin-walled, does that mean that the pipes could crack under the weight of all that earth? I actually looked up from the manufacturer of these pipes, which is like Charlotte pipe. So according to them, unlike metal piping systems, plastic piping does not have a known crush rating or weight in which it will fail. It's almost entirely dependent on proper backfill for its strength in underground applications. So basically, if you bury this pipe, just make sure that it's below the frost line and make sure you backfill properly.
Oh, did I backfill properly?
You just want to make sure that there's no spaces like under the pipe so that there's unequal pressure. Make sure everything's, filled in nice and tight. Now, what about other materials other than PVC? I think PVC is really a good material for this. It is resistant to like mold and bacteria. It repels water, so it really helps with the drainage, and that's going to help with any kind of health risks. You don't want to use anything that is like corrugated for that reason, because moisture can puddle up in the corrugation
and get kind of trapped in there.
Also, you don't want to use materials that are like water permeable, or that something that can hold the water or water can like get into, sit in. So I think like concrete or clay, and anything that is going to degrade or corrode. Metal might rust or corrode.
Because basically there's a lot of water and oxygen flowing through there, so
Yeah.
that'll eat away at that metal over time.
So why did we go with a 4-inch diameter pipe? Why not something bigger?
Right? Bigger is better.
Not always. So we just went with this because we know there are examples of other people using this size, and it's worked well for them, and they've been using them for many years, and it's worked great.
If you go with anything larger than a 4-inch pipe, it could possibly significantly increase the cost of this, because I don't think that would be readily available. I mean, you can get 4-inch drain pipe at just about any hardware store.
But I read that you might be able to go up to like 8-inch diameter, and that might work. But remember, like, if you get too big with the pipes, it's going to start to lose efficiency.
At a certain size, you're going to get so much airflow, and you're probably not going to, all that's probably not going to get cooled off.
And why didn't we use perforated pipe? Why the solid ones?
Would have been easier, right? Save time on drilling the holes.
Yeah, well, really, we just wanted the single row of holes at the very bottom. You don't want holes on the side or the top or anywhere else, because soil could get in there, like, I don't know, worms or insects, and you don't want that.
I think they're relatively the same price if you get the perforated pipe versus the solid pipe, but you can control the holes a little bit better, and it doesn't really take that much more time.
Now, what about preventing mold? Because you definitely don't want mold in the system that's bringing air into your house that you're going to be breathing.
And I think we covered that a little bit, but I mean, just the fact that we're using PVC helps prevent mold. The fact that we put the drainage holes in there allows for the water to drain out. Those are definitely a couple of very important preventative steps. And then also making sure no organic matter gets in there.
Yep. The gravel at the bottom helps with the drainage too, but it also could help things, you know, worms or something, from tunneling up from the bottom. And screen off the ends, make sure no debris gets in that way.
And you're all good.
Yeah.
I think people even mentioned about, well, how can you clean the pipes? And you can clean them, but it could be a very difficult process. So it's best just to keep it clean, do a good job with the install, and you shouldn't have to worry about it.
Yes. Just take a lot of care in putting it together and keeping things out that should not be in there. What about protecting the ends of the tubes, because most of it's underground, but you know, the ends are sticking up out of the ground. So how do you protect that?
Until we do something with it, I've already kind of put a layer of paint on there, and we got the screens on there. That'll give it a little protection from the ultraviolet light, but eventually we will add more to it.
Definitely probably want to put paint on it right away, but we're going to be shading it. I don't think we talked about this at all.
This is new for you guys.
But we want to plant a food forest over this whole area, and that will provide shade to protect the tubing, but it'll also cool down the air, and it'll add some moisture to the soil, all of which will help make this system more efficient. Of course, we're going to have to make sure that the things we plant don't have really deep roots that can affect the pipes. Also, I don't know if I even mentioned this to you, but I was thinking of putting like some kind of ferro cement sculpture around the tube, and that will help protect it as well. Maybe we can make it look like something natural, like rocks or something.
Ferro cement would be good.
Yeah.
Nice, solid, and then could make it very sculptural too.
So what kind of temperatures might we expect to see from this system?
I really wish we could, get some hard evidence for you guys to see just how well the system works, but until we get the rest of the house built, we won't be able to get that firsthand evidence. Of course, once we do have things ready to go, we'll definitely make another video detailing that. But what can people expect?
Well, we can go off of what other people have experienced, and what I've heard is for a standard house, you can expect like around a 20-degree difference inside versus outside temperature. Now, for a really energy efficient home, you might see like as much as 30-degree difference. Someone who lived in a passive solar straw bale house, they said when it was about 100 degrees outside, it was 70 degrees inside.
That's pretty impressive.
People also wonder if a system like this works well in like a humid climate, or what about if you get a lot of rain? We live somewhere where it's a little more dry.
Kind of interesting because this system actually works better in humid climates.
If there's more moisture in the air, there's more condensation that can happen, and that can cool the air even more. Now, if you live in a really humid climate, there might be a little too much moisture in the air, and you might want to consider adding more tubes to the system to draw more of that moisture out of the air.
Instead of one tube going into a room, you might need to have 2 tubes.
And as far as rain goes, just make sure the rain isn't going into the tubes. Now, what about Legionnaire's disease? Because some systems can have that problem, certain kinds of like HVAC systems that get contaminated. So is that a concern? I would say that's probably similar to like mold or other bacterial contaminations. You're going to want to treat that in the same way. Keep everything clean from the start.
Like I said, just take that time to install everything right.
Probably don't want to use like used materials, like used pipes,
Yep.
because who knows what's on that.
Very cool. So we hope you found this very informative. Again, putting this project together from beginning to end, I really wish we could kind of show you how well it works, but we're not quite there yet. We might be able to get some readings from the root cellar in the near future, but it'll be a little bit because we still gotta seal it up. And if there's any more questions, we'll leave those down below. We can try and get those in future videos. Use this as a resource to help you if you are interested in installing something like this. And I do believe that we are going to have a PDF ready. So if you are looking to install something yourself, we are going to have a PDF available that you can reference, where you don't have to like maybe go through this whole video and start and stop certain parts, although you can use a video as a reference, but the PDF will be a nice sort of like handy guide. Oh, you can have that with you while you're out installing it, so as a quick reference.
That's true. And like we'll have everything laid out step by step on there.
So we hope you found this informational. If you're new here, if this is your first time watching us, stick around because we are building our own home off-grid here in the Arizona desert, so you got to see how this all comes together. All right, give us a big thumbs up for Earth Tubes, and we'll catch you in the next video, y'all. Bye.